including me, Sean, our president, Kevin, our technical director, and Donnie, our secretary, all of them right around here, busily working. And these are a lot of our helpers who lead our philanthropy efforts and who host our speakers. These are the many ways you can get involved with the atheist community of San Jose. You can do it online. You can come to events. We create events. We welcome you to take an active part in our organization. Tonight, the cash in the donation jar will go directly to the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, a very important organization. Our speaker was talking, but afterwards we're going to have a question and answer session, and everything will be live streamed and recorded. So we are online now. We're live streaming now. The atheist community of San Jose is hosting the Military Religious Freedom Foundation this evening. The different ways that you can contact us online are on our website and on Meetup, where we announce all of our activities. We welcome all of you to come to Atheist Community of San Jose events. We have a lively community and with lots of activities. The Atheist Community of San Jose is an organization for atheists and like-minded non-believers, founded to develop and support the atheist community and to provide opportunities for socializing, philanthropy, education, and friendship. We promote a positive public perception of atheists and secularists and work with other organizations in pursuit of common goals. Okay, now I'm going to introduce our special speaker for this evening, representing the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. Colonel Gregory Petrequin was born in Fresno. He grew up in 4 European countries and is fluent in French, which has been very helpful during his military career. He got his undergraduate degree from San Francisco State, and then his graduate work in Sacramento. He got 3 different master's degrees over the years, one of which at least was in aeronautical engineering. I didn't manage to get straight what all the other ones were. Was in an active military position in the Air Force for 7 years. He was a navigator. He specialized in air refueling. It is a very tricky thing to do, he tells me. He's involved during that 20 years. He was involved in storm air support in 1991. Then in Iraq in 2003 on, and after that he was in Djibouti and the Horn of Africa, supporting our work in posting terrorist work in several African countries. Again, he was doing cut and civilian search and rescue work in that theater. Colonel Petrequin based on bases and bases in the Middle East and Africa. He's very familiar with the situation of religion on U.S. military bases, both at home and abroad. So we want to welcome Colonel Petrequin, and please welcome him to the Atheist Center.
There we go. A little better. Probably come down a little bit here. Turn me down a little bit, please. You're gonna do it. We are short-handed. We're good. Almost. Welcome everyone, and thank you very much, Julie and this great organization for inviting me this evening. I come to you basically 3 ways, if you will. First, I'm representing the Military Religious Freedom Foundation tonight. Actually, the very first time I've actually come to speak about the organization, and Mikey, the president of the organization, has entrusted me to come do a good job in his stead. I come to you also as a retired military officer who has been subject to many of the constitutional type violations and has witnessed those violations myself. And then also I come to you as a fellow atheist. And so this is wonderful to be with a group of like-minded people that I'm going to enjoy sharing some time with you this evening. First off, I need to do a little bit of, got to know my audience here a little bit. Do we have any active duty military in the audience? Any retired military? Perfect. Veterans, some experience. Anybody that's had military time, little vets there, okay, great. Any ROTC, Academy cadets, anything here? No, okay. Super. And the reason I say that is that I want to try to focus I don't want to make any assumptions on what folks know and don't know. One of the things I do want to start off right away, that this organization was born out of constitutional violations that were observed at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. And so that was the hub of where things started. And I just want to explain to you what these are. If you're a military officer, it doesn't matter what service you're in, there's 3 ways that you can come into the military as an officer. You can go to a service academy, which the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, and who else has it? Who am I forgetting? The Coast Guard has their academy, correct. And that's basically 24/7, 4 years of military training at that specific university. You can go through the Reserve Officer Training Corps, which is in universities. That's the way I went through. Did 2 years. You can do a 2-year or 4-year program there. And when you come out, you have a commission. Or you can go to Officer Training School. You get selected for that. And I think the program now is somewhere around 9 or 10 weeks where they're trained, and then they come out with a commission. So there's 3 different ways. You all wind up with the same thing, with wearing gold bars on your shoulder. So when I start talking about some of the different places where things have happened, you'll have a little bit better idea on what they exactly involve. Okay, super. Well, tonight I'm basically going to introduce you to the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. We're going to go through that, and then I'm going to talk about some personal experiences, and then we'll finish up with some questions and answers afterwards. And nothing is off limits. All questions are fair game. If I know the answer to it, I'll be glad to give it to you. If I don't know the answer to it, I'll tell you I don't know the answer, and I'll tell you where I can find it and maybe get back to you, or I might be able to tell you where you can look it up. But especially when it comes to some of the workings of the foundation, I'm not going to make if I don't know the answer to it, I'm not going to make something up. Now, I'll make up a lie about myself, because as an aviator, we have a lot of good ones. So, and then maybe we can share those at the bar later. To get things started, I want to show you a film, and it's only 9.5 minutes long. It's very short, but it's going to introduce you to a systematic, dedicated, well-funded, integrated, passionate organization, basically what I call the religious fundamentalists, and that includes evangelicals and the dominionists. And they are basically attempting, like a cancer, to integrate and infiltrate every section of our militaries, all our services, in order to achieve their specific end goals. And so I'm going to show you how they're doing it.
everybody in the Marine Corps is taught basic unit infantry skills before they go to their MOS or follow-on training. I realize this is a unique opportunity. This is what we call a gateway ministry.
This is all you want to see. It puts the student, the ranger student, in the absolute worst possible condition. Most of them will go a couple of days with no food. Some of them have gone as long as 3 days without any sleep whatsoever. My goal has been to meet them when they're at their absolute worst, when they're oldest and the most tired and the most hungry that they're going to be. Because the more difficult the circumstances, the more receptive the average person becomes to issues of faith. I believe that God has called me to technology, really to work and to learn how to know. There are over 25,000 Department of Defense leaders working in the rings and corridors of the Pentagon. This embassy must bring these men and women into an intentional relationship with Jesus Christ. I meet the people that come to my director, and I tell them right up front who Jack Cadden is, and I start with the fact that I'm an old-fashioned American, and my first priority is my faith in God, then my family, and then country.
I would say Centurion's Watch is a wonderful way that you could help any donation or resource you could give to this organization. It's faith-based.
The use of our armed forces as an evangelical Christian mission field is carried out from within the ranks of chaplains and other service members, as well as by civilian parachurch organizations. One of the largest military-wide parachurch ministries is Cadden International, whose strategic ministry is successful because, in their words, shaken people are usually more ready to hear about God than those who are at ease, making them more responsive to the gospel. The largest parachurch military ministry targeting young, vulnerable service members is Campus Crusade for Christ's military ministry.
The first strategic objective is to evangelize and disciple the members of the U.S. Armed Forces. Our vision is to transform the nations of the world through the militaries of the world. We try to reach our recruits immediately. There are 450,000 recruits in the freshman class of this next year's armed forces. That's going through boot camp. We will touch about 200,000 of them this next year with our staff. We have staff at half of the nation's boot camps.
Through evangelism and discipleship, each year cadets are recognizing God's call upon their lives.
Here you go. Thanks. I'll set it over here.
Our purpose for Campus Crusade for Christ with the Air Force Academy is to make Jesus Christ the issue at the Air Force Academy around the world. And I think that we're seeing God do that. We're seeing kids come to Christ being built up in the faith and being sent out to reach the world. They're going to pay missionaries when they leave here.
The following clips, all filmed in Afghanistan, clearly demonstrate the effect of this pervasive and pernicious pattern and practice of evangelical Christian proselytization throughout our military.
There's no doubt these men need the rules.
Especially with the Afghan people as well, that everyone here would just know the truth of Christ more and more every day, and that it would really make them free.
All of you, if you name the name of Christ, are commissioned to be witnesses for him. So does that mean we all preachers?
The man giving this sermon, the chief of the chaplains in Afghanistan, Lieutenant Colonel Gary Henry. He tells the congregation, all of them servicemen and women, that they need to go on a recruiting drive for the faith.
The special forces guys, they hunt men, basically. We do the same thing as Christians. We hunt people for Jesus. Hunt them down. Get the hound of heaven at them. So we get them in the kingdom. Right? That's what we do. That's our business.
Commit those Rangers who are fighting the good fight even now. And those Rangers
fear is that someone will initiate a nuclear exchange, believing completely and totally that they are the tool of Jesus Christ in doing that.
If you find a prophet who is not organized, demonize them, or tell them they will burn in the fires of hell.
This is a felony against democracy. It's a war against our Constitution and our way of life. And please, I'm asking you, help me stand up.
I just got to chill. And if you're not terrified, you should be. Did you hear any of them talking about the Constitution? Did you hear any of them talking about the military and war as an extension of politics to achieve national objectives and strategy? No. Did you hear anything about patriotism, American patriots? No. Not even close. These folks have one agenda and one agenda only. It's to push their religious agenda and push their religious doctrine. And they are out there, people, and it is huge, it is deep, and it has basically infiltrated all our services, and that's the reason that the MRFF exists. Tell you a little bit about the organization that's out there to fight, and I'll tell you, if you could put together, if you had a choice to pick the best things of everything, to put together a team to fight this fight, you could not get a better one than the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, run by Mikey and Bonnie Weinstein. I want to tell you first, they're a nonprofit human rights organization. We get accused of being an anti-Christian organization, being an atheist organization, and those are just the nicest things they say. Mikey, as the president, is the head of Satan's army. What else do they? Well, they call him a lot of things, but spawn of Satan, field general of Satan's army. Those are some good ones. But the one thing that we want to emphasize, we're the Religious Freedom Foundation. And that means freedom for religion and freedom from religion. Two sides to the same coin. And we understand that. The people I'm talking to in this room understand that. But the folks that we are fighting right now do not understand that. They only see the one side, and it's their religion. Some of the quotes from the movie that absolutely terrified me, first off, the chaplains, what did you notice about all the chaplains? How were they dressed? It's very important to note. They're all dressed in military uniforms. Every one of them is a military officer. Okay, but you can't tell. I could go stand in my uniform next to one of those gentlemen, and unless you got close to me and looked at the specific things on my uniform, you could not tell me apart from them. Okay, so do you think that there's any difference when I speak to somebody and this chaplain speaks to somebody? Do you think that people are able to differentiate between, okay, this is a chaplain, he should be telling me religious things, and this is another officer would be telling me something else? You can't tell the difference. And that's one of the big problems that we'll continue to talk about later. But we hunt people for Jesus. So that's why we're here. I thought we were in Afghanistan for a different reason. It might just be me. Set the hounds of heaven after them. That's our business. Terrifying. Government-paid missionaries. Government-paid missionaries. That's your tax dollars, folks, that are paying for that. And the last one I'll talk about before we move on is General Jack Cadden, who's the Air Force two-star general right there. Basically, he's in charge of a directorate, a specific division in the Pentagon. When they come into my directorate, right up front, I tell them who I am, who Jack Cadden is. I start with the fact I'm an old-fashioned American. Okay, great. Now, my first priority, what did he say it was? Faith in God. He didn't say anything about the Constitution, didn't say anything about the Air Force, didn't say anything about the military. Second thing is his family. I hope his wife's on board with that. And third, his country is third. I have a hard time seeing a general officer say that his country ranks third in his priority list. Now, one of the problems that I'm going to be addressing tonight is the way that religion is forced onto people against their will. And I call it a spiritual rape. And that's essentially what it is. It's senior officers, senior leaders in the services that are pushing their religion onto people that cannot fight back. And if you know, and with the military, it's not like maybe a different civilian job where if you don't like what your boss is telling you, you can tell them whatever you want, turn the heel, and walk out. In the military, if you do that, you might wind up in jail. Okay, so it's a very different dynamic. You cannot exercise some of your constitutional rights as you would if you weren't in the service. Okay, so basically you're a captive audience, and that's the problem. Did you notice everyone that was talking there, they had captive audiences? And they were able to force their religion onto somebody that cannot fight back. And the reason the MRFF exists is to be the voice that these folks do not have. Because they are not able to fight back, but boy, Mikey and the MRF can fight back. And with General Jack Cadden, if I walked in his office as a full colonel, like the last rank I had in the service, if I walked in and he said that to me, I would have turned onto my heel and walked out the door. And I would have gone to the colonel's group and said, I'm not going to work for this guy. And I could have got away with it. As a full colonel, I probably could have got away with it. But say if I'm a young enlisted troop or a young officer and they walk in, do you think that troop is going to be able to do that? No. They're going to stand there and they're going to take it. And what if that person is not a Christian? What if they're Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic, whatever? Any one of those, how do you think they'll feel when they meet a gentleman like this? It's terrifying. All right, let's take a look at the, how do they go about doing this? Mikey found out soon enough that one or two people cannot conduct this fight on their own. So he's put together a tremendous organization. And I just want to tell you a little bit about their order of battle, if you will, which means how they're organized to take on this fight. Mikey Weinstein is the president. Mikey and Bonnie, his wife Bonnie, are the co-founders. He has a board of 3 individuals, an ambassador, a lawyer, and a distinguished public figure. He also has an advisory board that I encourage you to go onto the MRF website and take a look at the bios of the people that are on that board. Ambassadors, chaplains, senior ranking military people, CEOs, Nobel Prize laureate. Who else do we have on there? Reverends, educators, ministers. A really incredible, diverse group of people who all have one thing in common. They're patriots. And they also see that despite what their own personal convictions are when it comes to religion, they know that the Constitution comes first. He also has a media and web resources group that are very active, and they were very active setting this up for us this evening. They have a team of lawyers. Now, the lawyers don't directly work for Mikey. They're lawyers that work in firms that do a lot of the work pro bono when they require legal expertise, because they're also patriots and they believe in the Constitution of the United States, and so they donate their time to do that. And as you can imagine, the legal side is very, very busy. They also have a research department, a tremendous research department. It's headed by a research director. Her name is Chris Rada, and I'm going to put a plug in for Chris. She's written 2 books, Liars for Jesus, Volume 1 and 2. These are both available on Amazon. And she's gone through, and she's basically, it's the religious rights alternate version of American history. And she's gone through and debunked it. And Mr. Barton is, basically everything he said's a lie, and she proves it in here. So I encourage you, if you have some time, a little light reading, but it's excellent, very well put together, tremendous work on her part. They also have a grants manager. It is a nonprofit organization. They rely strictly on donations and grants and basically Mikey's bank account. And so they have to have somebody to run that. There's a personal assistant, administrative director. There's MRF coordinators at some of the bases. Now, they don't sit in an office with a big sign out in front. That would be career threatening. Okay, these individuals, some of them are what we call out. They may be very vocal and make themselves known, so when people have issues, they can come to them. And some of them are pretty much in deep cover because they're terrified. They want to help. They want to get the word. They want to get the word to Mikey if there's a violation. but they're terrified for their own safety and for their careers, and so they're kind of deep cover, if you will. But those folks are out there helping, and they really have to be recognized. Finally, security. Mikey receives death threats daily. He travels with security. He doesn't go anywhere without them. And I'm not going to go into any more detail about how they do their job, but needless to say, the fine, loving Christians out there would like nothing more than to kill Mikey. And they remind him of that daily. The group is about 400 strong, with only about 25 to, well, somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 to 40 of those are actual paid positions. The rest of it are all volunteer time. And that's what I am. I'm a volunteer contributor, if you will. I volunteer. I write responses back to some of the hate mail that Mikey gets. I write responses back to some of the blog entries and those type of things. I'm fairly active on social media, on his site, responding back to some of the stuff that people put on there. And then I'm also a financial contributor to the organization. Okay. I'm just going to run through very quickly on how the MRF came about, and because there's a lot of very interesting, I'll be able to share some of the big constitutional violations that happened and then the resulting events that came out of that. And it's basically a 22-month period where they went from 0 to the MRFF, and it happened in a very short time. And you can thank Mel Gibson and 2 pissed off parents for the creation of the MRFF. And there's nothing, 2 pissed off parents is pretty tough group. So, but we can thank Mel Gibson for this. And the reason I'm saying Mel Gibson is in the spring of 2004, what movie came out? Passion of the Christ. Or as Mikey calls it, the Jesus Chainsaw Massacre. Or another one is Freddy Meets Jesus, or Jesus Meets Freddy, something along those lines. Because it was quite a bloodbath. But in a fundamentalist evangelical organization like the United States Air Force Academy, which one of the folks on the board calls it the Bible College in the hills, or the Bible College in the mountains is another term for that, because they're so evangelical there, if you will. Well, basically, the movie, when Passion of the Christ came out, that literally created an orgasmic fervor at that school. And leading up to the showing of the movie, cadets were told by senior ranking officers, you will go to this. When they came to sit down to dinner, 3 meals a day, the Air Force Academy has a kitchen, or has a dining room that holds 5,000 people at one time. It's huge. Next to everybody's plate were brochures about the movie, about the film. Cadets were expected to go. It was just people were running around evangelizing to the unchurched there, if you will. How do you think the Jewish cadets felt? And any other religions, but namely the Jewish cadets. Mikey's oldest son was getting ready to graduate from the academy. His youngest son had just come on board as a freshman or a 4th year, and he called Mikey and said, his oldest son called and said, hey, what can I do? Because he was literally getting anti-Semitic slurs, was just kind of the nicest things that happened to him. And he was basically terrified. Not much he could do at that point, but Mikey realized there's a problem. There's a big problem at this school. So over the next few months, he spent a lot of time gathering information, gathering as much information as he could about what was going on there. And basically wound up getting that, quite a large file, and presenting it to the superintendent of the academy, who chose to do nothing. And actually, they say it didn't even get to him, which is pretty sad. And following that, in the summer of 2004, Mikey came to the academy to attend a graduates leaders conference. Every year, the academy brings in former cadets for a few days to kind of go over, to let them know what's going on at the academy and catch them up on things. And it was at that point, and this is probably the most poignant part of this, is that Mikey's youngest son, Curtis, who was a 4th year, essentially a freshman, got to see his dad while his dad was there. Mikey lives in Albuquerque. He came up to Colorado Springs. And when he saw his son said, Dad, I need to tell you something. And Mikey's like, well, what is it? Well, I can't tell you on campus. So they got in their car, they drove down to a McDonald's in Colorado Springs. And Mikey, imagine what's going through Mikey's mind at this point when your son says, I got to tell you something. And so anyway, they get there, and Mikey's like, basically, son, what have you done? And he says, Dad, it's not what I've done, it's what I'm going to do. And he goes, I'm going to beat the shit out of the next guy that tells me that me or my people are responsible for killing Jesus Christ. Because he had been inundated with this since he got to the academy, and especially around after the Passion of the Christ was screened there. And so that basically set things in motion. From that point, Mikey took all the information that he had, put together a 19-page document that was essentially the founding document of the organization. And if you wanted to look it up online, it's called The Religious Climate of the United States Air Force Academy, with a subhead that says a clear violation of the U.S. Constitution. And Mikey's intent was to shout up from the rooftops, because his initial push to try to get the superintendent to take care of things himself, Mikey had been in the Air Force. He knew chain of command. He tried to work it that way, give the academy a chance to fix their problem. And they did, and they chose to ignore it. So Mikey started ratcheting up the heat. The next place he went to the Colorado Springs Gazette and talked to a reporter there by the name of Pam Zubek. Now imagine Colorado Springs, if you don't know, Colorado Springs is the home of the American Taliban. Okay? Outside of the Vatican and Mecca, there probably is not a bigger gathering of religious people or organizations outside of those two places. James Dobson has his mega church there. Ted Haggard had a mega church there until he had a little incident. But he's back, folks. He's back. And he's got a small church that he's operating out of his garage, and I think he'll work his way back up to megachurch status here sometime soon. But anyhow, incredible Sea Springs, home of the American Taliban. So what does Mikey do? He has the Colorado Springs Gazette start pumping stories out about it, right to the doorsteps of the believers. Beautiful strategy. Well, of course, that got folks' attention right away. And about that same time, what happens? National news starts picking it up. Mikey's asked to come on to talk shows. Things are written about it in big papers like the New York Times. The Air Force can't ignore it now. A lot of bad publicity coming out. So what do? In fine fashion, they put together a blue ribbon panel to get to the bottom of this. Now, the thing that's very interesting is they put a gentleman, a Lieutenant General Roger Brady, in charge of this panel. Now, Roger Brady is a born-again Christian. So Roger Brady's job, and I'll read it to you verbatim here, they put a born-again Christian to investigate the degree to which born-again Christians were systematically violating the U.S. Constitution. Gee, I could write the end of that paper, the conclusion, right now. Oh, they didn't do anything wrong. And you got to remember, too, the discrimination that's going on here is not Christians against Catholics and Protestants and Jewish people or Muslims. It's evangelical Christians telling other Christians, you're not Christian enough. So there's mainline Christian organizations that were considered not Christian enough for these folks. This is how radical they are. And so they put Roger Brady as one of those people, and they put him in charge of this panel. Are you kidding me? I know this individual. I worked for him when I was in Germany. And anyway, I'll kind of leave it at that. Obviously, that report was debunked. Basically came out and said, oh, nobody did anything wrong. There might have, and if there was something done wrong, it was just some overzealous cadets. Essentially, boys will be boys. So they blamed the cadets and not the staff, who basically are, the leadership there are basically the ones that are responsible for all this happening. So this report was debunked very quickly after that, and the media storm continued. And about that time, a report came out from the chief of the deputy chief of the Air Force chaplains. They interviewed him for a New York Times article about all this, and he made a comment in there. And he said, "We, meaning we in the Air Force, we reserve the right to evangelize the unchurched." That was part of the article. Mikey attributed initially to, oh, that's just him saying something off the cuff, but it became quite something else. But basically, all hell broke loose, pardon the pun. And at that point, Mikey demanded the resignation of Donald Rumsfeld immediately. He was the Secretary of Defense at the time. Good call, didn't happen as you might imagine. However, Mikey took the fight straight to the then acting Secretary of the Air Force, Mr. Pete Guerin. Pete Guerin, born-again Christian. And he basically demanded that comment be retracted. Because if the Deputy Chief of Chaplains of the U.S. Air Force says that, that's Air Force policy. Standing up there in a blue uniform, stars, Air Force policy. And are you kidding me when it comes to that? Massive constitutional violation there of the Establishment Clause. Pete Guerin, didn't want to be bothered with it. So he hands it over to Mary Walker, who was the chief counsel, the general counsel of the Air Force at that time. Mary took it on. Oh, by the way, Mary's a born-again Christian. Founded some Christian-type organizations, so very involved. At this point, Mikey wondered, is there anybody in the United States Air Force leadership that is not a born-again Christian? And he had a lot of reason to say that. Well, Mary Walker said, give me a week. And a week passed. A second week passed. Well, Mikey doesn't sit around. Mikey was preparing a lawsuit at the time. Soon as she blew him off, basically, for the second week, Mikey filed a federal lawsuit in federal court in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the lawsuit was, let's see, basically, let's see, what do they say? I want to read it to you exactly so we have it exactly correct. Basically, it was a complaint for violation of constitutional rights, and it was filed in federal court, so federal lawsuit. Miss Mary Walker had blown him off for 2 weeks. How long do you think it took her to get back to him after that lawsuit hit? Well, pretty close, pretty close. 6.5 hours. So, at that point, she did issue a retraction and basically said it is not Air Force policy, and I want to read it so I get exactly correct for you, that there is no existing Air Force policy endorsing proselytizing or evangelizing. Okay, no former Air Force policy. Okay, that's good. And she said she was going to withdraw the document that had been understood to represent such a policy. And Mikey went, there's a document that says this? Holy. He thought it was just the chaplain speaking off the cuff. Well, no, there was one there. They pulled it out. It was a 2002 document, booklet that came from the chaplain's course. So the people that are coming in the military as chaplains, where they go through the course, and it said it right there, chapter and verse. So at that point, Mikey basically said, hey, we'll settle this lawsuit if you'll put an order out that basically bans any form of proselytizing or evangelizing by Air Force members while on duty. Pretty simple request. And we support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, right? It makes sense. Should be a pretty easy decision, right? No. The Air Force produced a document that said any sermon or religious message delivered by Air Force chaplains cannot be attributed to the Air Force or government as Air Force or government speech. Are you kidding me? Okay? If you go to an Air Force base, say, and that you go to church there and there's a chaplain standing up there in a uniform talking to you, I'm supposed to go, oh, I understand. You're wearing that uniform, you're getting paid by the taxpayers, you have a commission, but you're not representing the Air Force or the government, right? Well, obviously that didn't go well with Mikey. However, the lawsuit dragged out in fine fashion, and eventually it was dismissed in federal court. Now, however, that was still a victory. It brought awareness. It brought, Mikey got a broader understanding of what was going on. And he found out it was not just the Air Force that this problem existed. It was in all the services. And so he got, but, you know, getting the publicity out there, getting that, getting an awareness of it and making a lot of noise about it got them off to a great start. And Mikey knew at that point, hey, I can't do this by myself. And he and his wife couldn't do it by themselves, so that's when they put the organization together. So the organization was officially founded in August of 2005. So you go from early fall 2004 to December, roughly 2005. Very short period. A lot of stuff happened, and a lot of stuff came to the forefront. Mikey calls the work of the MRFF lonely, dangerous, brutal, and expensive. And I'll tell you, that's saying it kindly. They average over a dozen calls a day from clients in across all the services, calling to object to something that's going on, as far as basically constitutional violations or some form of unwanted evangelizing or proselytizing that's going on. A dozen calls a day. Some months they could get 1,000 calls, another month maybe 100, but the average is about every 2 hours. I was talking to Mikey on the phone the other day preparing for this, and while we were talking, he had 2 calls. 40 minutes we were on the phone. The complaints come from across all the services, and it's basically Christians abusing other Christians is really what it comes down to. Primarily it's from the clients are young. They're young enlisted or young officers that make those calls to him. As of this last week, the Military Religious Freedom Foundation had 54,021 clients since 2005. 54,000. But if you talk to the detractors of the organization, oh, that never happened. Those are all lies. You're making all this stuff up. 54,000 people. That should tell you something. Then I'm here to tell you in the flesh. And so what's very interesting about those 54,000 people, 96% of them identify as practicing Christians of some denomination or another. The rest, the last 4%, is a mixture of all the other religions, including the Jedi Church. He has, I think, 4 clients from the Jedi Church. No Pastafarians yet. I might be the first. Okay, how do they fight? They have a very diverse team, obviously, that we just already talked about. And they're incredibly talented, incredibly passionate, all-American patriots. Availability. If you want to try to get a hold of Mikey Weinstein, you are very lucky to get a few seconds of his time. His phone rings nonstop. He and Bonnie work 24/7. Literally, I'm not sure Mikey even sleeps. But basically, they are available to their clients 24/7. And if you read across a lot of the testimonials that come back when they thank Mikey for taking care of an issue for them, they'll say, "I can't believe it. I sent you an email and you called me 5 minutes later." Okay, so that kind of availability and that kind of speed is one thing that is making the organization very successful. Tenacity, grabbing. Mikey's a bulldog. Gets a hold of something, he's not letting go. If it's the right thing to do. Also, his intelligence capabilities are quite tremendous. Mikey had been in the Air Force. Mikey worked in the Reagan White House. Mikey worked for many different law firms. Mikey worked for Ross Perot for a good period of time. Mikey has a lot of connections. And those individuals, all American patriots, do some amazing things to help him out when he needs it. The bottom line is they've got the Constitution on their side. And the one tactic is they hit hard, they hit fast, and they make a sucking chest wound if they can do it. Because that's the only thing these people will understand. Okay, and the reason, it's kind of like at a picnic. If you go to a picnic, if you have one wasp while you're having a picnic and it's flying around, you might try to swat it or ignore it, but you're going to continue your picnic. But if a giant cloud rolls in on you, you're going to take some action. And that's what happens. Mikey and the MRFF is that giant cloud. Now, as you can quite imagine, the significant amount of hate mail comes with this. 8 to 12 emails per day, phone calls, usually at least 8 to 12, pure hate. Mikey gets phone calls all hours in the night of people calling to throw abuse his way. Some just breathe heavy on the phone. Other people do really dangerous things. He's had his windows shot out of his house a few times. He's had swastikas painted on the side of his house. He's had animals disemboweled and decapitated and thrown on his front yard. And this is because we're standing up for the Constitution. Okay, he's not anti-Christian. He's not anti-religion. He's standing up for the United States Constitution. And this is what the kind, Christian, Jesus-loving people, this is how they react. I just want to, some of the things they call him: puppet of the Antichrist, Mike the Kike, irresponsible doomsdayer, terrorist-loving communist, all those wonderful things. Such amount of hate mail that his wife Bonnie wrote a book. This book is nothing but hate mail. And with Bonnie's comments. Tremendous book, very well written. Bonnie is a beautiful and incredible woman, and she's got some great insight to this. It's a fabulous book. And it's called You Can Be a Good Speller or a Hater, but Not Both. And when you read them, you'll see why. These do not come from PhDs. They do not come from rocket scientists. They don't come from lawyers. They don't come from intelligent people. They come from the dregs of the earth, and they can't spell. Just let me read you one that we just got the other day that Mikey forwarded to me. This was concerning Kenneth Copeland. You know who he is? The Army invited him to come speak at the National Prayer Breakfast at one of the Army bases. And he says PTSD doesn't exist, and you should cure PTSD by getting good with Jesus. Yeah. You think that's fair to all the sufferers out there when you have that kind of idea? And he was invited to speak. The MRFF did what they could to try to get him disinvited. Unfortunately, he still managed to get there to speak. But just some of the emails Mikey got. Let me read it to you real quick. You stinking commie Jew coward. Leave Mr. Kenneth Copeland alone to witness to the soldiers for Christ in America. Make America great again. Gee, where'd you heard that? By making America's army for Christ again. As for you, Kike, Mikey, how's about you go take a nice little shower, just like your burnt relatives did in the camps in World War II. Oh, it gets better. Mr. Michael Weinstein, our church has a single question for you to consider. Has it ever occurred to you that the reason your wife Bonnie suffers from multiple sclerosis is as punishment to you from the Lord Jesus Christ? Boy, if I had a Lord that was giving me multiple sclerosis, I don't think I'd be into that Lord too much. Because of the MRF vicious attacks constant against loving Christians, it's hard to read because they don't write real well, in the armed forces, like you taking the Bible away from Air Force Major, just saying. Another one is about, we hope your daughter's babies and your daughter-in-law's babies miscarry. That's another kind little word that came from our loving Christians. I'll end the section on hate mail here. I want you to listen to a short phone call that Mikey got.
Is that why you're so hateful? Because your families were killed in masses in concentration camps. They were starved and beaten and cut alive, shot, and everything else. Is that why you're so hateful? Probably. Have a nice day.
About 100 of Mikey's extended families died in the gas chambers in the concentration camps. How would you feel getting a call like that? Mikey's always said if I changed my name to John Smith, about 96% of the calls would probably go away because most of the calls he gets are all anti-Semitic just because he's Jewish. A lot of the trackers say, is there really a problem out there? I work a lot of stuff on social media. I've got to the point where I don't engage in it too much more because they're just pure haters and they won't listen to reason or any rationale. So I don't waste my time so much anymore. But the two common things that always come out of social media are, is there really a problem? Because I was in the military and I never saw it. And I think you're making all of this up. And the second thing is so what? Why can't they do it? Those are the two most common things, and I'm going to address both of those. I can go on forever talking about what the problems are, and I can tell you specific examples, but of course with time I can't get into all of them. But right now, we have a fight going on against terrorism, against ISIS, against those kind of folks in the Middle East. Well, right now, since Mr. Trump entered the Oval Office, I hesitate to say president, I don't use his name and president in the same sentence. Since Mr. Trump showed up, Mikey's complaints have doubled, exactly doubled. And because of that, a lot of they've turned their viciousness from anti-Semitic to anti-what? Muslim. So right now we have a huge problem in the military with Muslim Americans being physically abused, mentally abused, discriminated against, you name it. And what do you think that does when those things happen and they become public news? Who else is watching that? ISIS. What do you think that does to ISIS? Fuel to the fire. Fuel to the fire. Okay, it emboldens them. It makes them more dangerous if they couldn't already be dangerous, which puts our troops at risk. So what these freedom-loving Christians are doing, they're putting our own troops at risk by doing this. And also putting that religious, justifying their religious fervor to make this thing continue to go longer, to keep fighting. So basically we are aiding and abetting the enemy when this happens. Just since I was in the service, and here's the other thing, I get a lot of, it never happened to me while I was in the military, I never saw it. Well, I'm going to tell you, I was in 27 years and I saw it. And just the few examples I'm going to give to you right now just occurred just in the last couple of years. This is not 27 years worth. This is just in the last couple of years. Our Chief of Staff of the Air Force, that's our leader. That's the person that runs the entire Air Force. They take an oath of office when they enter that position. They put on the 4-star, and they become the chief, and they take an oath of office to become the chief. What do you think they take that oath on? They take it on a Bible. I saw that the other day, and I mentioned it to Mikey, and he's like, we've tried. Okay, to me, that doesn't make sense. They've just said that they're going to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And what are they doing? They're taking it with their hand on a Bible. It just doesn't make sense. So, as I'm going to tell you later, leadership is the problem. And there's an example of right where it starts. When I was in Germany, every morning I try to get to the gym, and large gym, 10 screens on the wall, all showing Armed Forces Network television, which is great. So when you're on the treadmill and you're on a treadmill or whatever you're doing there, you can watch TV as you go along. And there were commercials from God. I didn't know God did commercials, but apparently he, she, or whatever does. And there were things along the lines of, hello. And they were all done with about 4 black slides with white words that would come out, like, I'm talking to you. And it would say, what are you doing this weekend? Ooh, I have an idea. Basically, why don't you come to church? And it was basically, probably, I started taking a pen and pencil with me on the treadmill. You got to be kidding me. And I'm trying to write this down as these are going along. And I did look rather funny doing that. But I did get a good collection of those. And at this point, I was a colonel in the Air Force, somewhat bulletproof, where I could actually speak my mind. I could out myself as an atheist and not fear retribution. I had made the rank that I want to make. Unless I commit a horrific crime, I'm going to retire as a full colonel. There's nothing that really they can do to me. So I was able to at least, and I knew nothing about the MRFF at this point. And so I was kind of doing this on my own. I called up the TV station and said, why are you running God commercials? And their first question was, are you agnostic? And I said, absolutely not. I'm a militant atheist. Slightly shocking. And that took the lieutenant colonel aback just a little. And I said, well, you got to stop running those. Absolute Absolute violation of the establishment clause of the Constitution. You took an oath, pal. Don't you know your Constitution? And his answer was, well, the chaplains, the Army chaplains who are paying for it, they've run out of money, so we're not putting the spots on anymore. So those did go away. Another one that was always very difficult was at basically every ceremony that we have, an award ceremony, a recognition ceremony, anything that involved the leadership coming together to do with the troops to do something. And let's say it was annual awards or quarterly awards. Let me tell you how they go. All the people that were nominated for the awards, which are very prestigious, quarterly and annual awards, the troops come in and they're recognized. They sit up front usually, and then their folks from their squadrons come, their peers come, and we all sit there and to cheer them on and hope that they're the ones picked. Well, this is how it always starts. Murmur, murmur, murmur. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the arrival of the official party. The official party is either a colonel or a general officer, a chaplain, and some other strap hangers, I call them. So we've all rise for the arrival of the official party. They come walking down the center. Stay standing, please, for the playing of the national anthem and for the invocation by Chaplain Muckety Muck. Happened every time. My response, and again, remember when I talked to you about spiritual rape, where somebody of authority or stronger or bigger than you in whatever capacity is forcing their religion on somebody that's helpless. We were helpless. Because what was our options? I could stand outside and wait until that whole process was done and then walk in front of 300 people by myself and go sit down at my place. I could turn around and walk out when the chaplain started. All things that would not go very well, would go over very well. Somebody like me would probably do it, but think about the folks, the young enlisted folks, the young officers, they're not going to do that. They are captive. They are captive, and they're going to sit there and listen to it. Now, the one thing that was good is I never bowed my head, because that was the first thing. Everybody bow your head. I never bowed my head, and that's when I picked out my fellow atheists. Because it was kind of one of these. And so we stood there quietly and sucked it up. The only concession that was made was eventually they did away with, after enough complaints happened, they did away with, in the name of Jesus and amen, to basically, please pray to your own God or whatever. They tried to qualify it. But it's the same chaplain standing up there, okay? So obviously not very effective. My boss had a Bible sitting right on his desk. And so when I went in to see my boss, when I would walk up to his desk, his Bible was front and center, so it's very obvious to where his religious proclivities lay. I think he knew I was an atheist. But anyhow, so I know right away where his mind is, as soon as I see that. He was pretty good about not pushing it until we had a squadron function where, at Thanksgiving, had a big potluck. Families come. We all get together at lunchtime. Everybody comes out of the office. We take a break. We have a nice Thanksgiving potluck. Families come. The kids come. It's a good time. He stood up and gave us a 5-minute sermon on that there is a God. Jesus is his son. There is a reason for this. And we got a nice 5-minute sermon. If I had known that the MRFF existed at that time, that would have been my first phone call when I walked out that door. I didn't know they existed. But I was horrified. Because up to that point, he had kept it to himself, and then his true colors showed. Other things that it's very institutionalized. The ceremony, flag folding ceremonies at retirement, where when somebody retires or they ask for a flag folding ceremony, the flag is brought out, presented very dignified, a very nice ceremony, except the words to it, every time the flag is folded, it's some religious connotation. And that's done at official functions. I think we've managed to nip that in the bud and get that off, but I think it still shows. And I'll tell you, even when I retired, at my retirement ceremony, I wanted a flag done that way. And I said, here's the version I want, and I gave the words. And the person looked at it and said, really? Doesn't say anything about God in here. I said, well, exactly. And they were also shocked when I didn't want a chaplain to give some sort of invocation or benediction at my ceremony. I said, hey, it's my ceremony. I'm going to do it the way I want. Okay. We'll finish up here pretty quick so we can get to the questions and answers. Just the last thing I want to talk to you about. Basically, people go, why is it a problem? Freedom of expression. We're Americans. We have the Constitution, First Amendment rights. By gosh, we can do it. Well, guess what? The military does not have every constitutional right that you do. Okay, there's certain things we can't say. There's certain things we can't do. And that was upheld in the Supreme Court. Because of the nature of the military and the uniqueness of our mission and what is required for good order and discipline to produce an effective warfighting machine, et cetera, there's certain things that you can't do. And one of them is, it's written very clearly in all the regulations, its senior leaders are not allowed to show favoritism of one religion or another, or of no religion. They're not allowed to do that openly. And it's right there. It's written down. It's a rule. But it's violated every single day. So anyway, I get, why is it a problem? First Amendment rights, those people can say anything. Well, obviously, they don't know anything about the military. They don't understand the Constitution. And they don't understand what the MRF advocates. They say, MRF says, hey, you can deploy your religion, but there's a time, there's a place, and there's a manner of doing it. We're not saying you can't do it, but you have to accomplish those three things. Because if you don't do it at the correct time, correct place, and the correct manner, bad things are going to happen. First off, violates the Constitution, it violates military regulation, it violates our human rights. It damages good order and discipline in a unit. Can you imagine the fracturing? Religion on its own is very divisive, right? What do you think that will do to a unit that fights together, that count on everybody watching each other's back, and effectively fighting together as an integrated team when you have it fractured by religion? It sows mistrust. Commanders don't have the trust of their troops. When all of a sudden I see a Bible-thumping commander, and I'm going, oh boy, when I go into war with this individual, is this person going to be using appropriate tactics, techniques, procedures, correct morality, Geneva Convention, all those things that you got to think about to effectively wage war? Or is this person going to be going, what would Jesus do? And what would Jesus do is terrifying. Second coming, Armageddon. You know, these folks, they kind of want to die because it's going to be better right after they die. And the military can make you die in a hurry. And they can end the world with nuclear weapons. Guess who controls the nuclear weapons? We have a madman in the White House who actually has the codes for it, but we have military people with keys that turn the keys to make those things go. Peer-on-peer violence, abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, that's bad enough. We've been at war since 2001. We're going on 17 years. Okay, when our troops, can you imagine me as an atheist, my company commander or one of my leaders or somebody else in my unit knows that they're evangelical Christian, and we go out on patrol together. Have a big firefight. Oops. That bullet I meant to shoot at the Taliban, I'm sorry it hit you. I would be absolutely terrified to go into that kind of situation right now if you had that divisiveness within a unit and that discrimination. Can you imagine? And finally, with the military, in order to keep getting promoted, performance reports, applicable jobs, good jobs, to continue to move up, because the military is up or out. If you don't hit certain points, promotion, you're gone. Okay? These people control your life. They control your career, they control your future. And they can turn it on and turn it off any way they please. Oh, Petrequin, that atheist. I think his next assignment should be in Alaska, on a little island up in the Bering Sea or something. Okay, they can do that. That's just the nice things they could do. Okay, just wrapping it up here before we hit the questions and answers. Solutions to this. Okay, if you stand up and complain about something, you're just a whiner. But if you have some solutions, then some ideas for solutions, then that's okay. These are my solutions. Leadership needs to lead. Because right now, the people that are committing these crimes against the Constitution are not punished. And you should see it. I mean, direct violations of the Constitution, direct violations of military regulations, insubordination to senior officers. We had an individual, one of the general officers that came into the Air Force Academy, she happens to be gay. And her wife, they came to the academy together. Well, we've had specific Air Force officers spend an awful lot of time bad-mouthing this general officer. This person's still in uniform. Okay, and bad-mouthing a general officer. And he's getting away with it. Okay? The Air Force is terrified, and the military, I'm not just saying Air Force, the military is terrified to punish people. And if they would just schwack some of these people and make an example of it, it's pretty effective. Everybody remember tailhook? The Navy has a tailhook that on their fighters, they grab the cable on a carrier. They had a convention every year, and it was an absolute brawl and debauchery and drunkenness, and it basically got to the point where they were physically assaulting some of the female officers and female people that were there. And it wasn't until that those people complained and put it out in the open that things changed. Because the Navy went after them and punished the people, the offenders, shut down tailhook for a while. I think it may still be going now, but it's a lot more tame than it used to be. Okay, make an example out of some of these people. And our leaders need to step up and lead. And right now, our leadership stinks. It absolutely stinks. And we have proof that it stinks. I can talk to you for 10 hours on why and what things people have gotten away with, and our leaders haven't done anything about it. Restricting, at the Air Force Academy, all those people I told you about, the American Taliban, they're allowed to come on campus. They're allowed to come pick cadets up, take them to their churches. They're allowed to conduct prayer sessions in some of the buildings there. They have unfettered access, and that's absolutely wrong. That needs to go away. And lastly, I would change the mission of the chaplain corps. I'd take them out of uniform. It's pretty radical. I would take them out of uniform. It's okay. If we need chaplains, if we think we need chaplains, I'd take them out of uniform right away because it just doesn't make sense. And the other thing, too, is that I would restrict some of the activities that they do. I would personally like to kick all the churches off the bases because I have never been anywhere that there wasn't representation off base. So I'm not denying somebody the ability to go to church on Sundays. It's just not on the base. Because every place I've been stationed, except for the Middle East, there's been a church of every denomination right outside the front gate. So let's just make that the practice. I know it's radical, and everybody go, well, Greg, that you just can't do that. We need to have the chaplains to minister to the folks, the military folks on base. Okay. In a combat zone, we need to have our chaplains there. Well, let's contract them. They don't need to be they don't need to be Air Force people. Let's contract them like we do everything else. Halliburton would make a killing. Not that they don't already do. So there's a lot of radical things. Those were personally my ideas. I would love to say that in front of somebody and watch their reaction, but obviously that won't happen. So again, I'm going to stop talking at this point and give you guys a chance to ask some questions, and anything's fair game. Sir. Okay.
Okay, go ahead and raise your hand. I'll come around with the mic.
Just pick one. Go ahead.
I'm interested in Mikey's, what did you say, 56,000 clients?
54. Yeah.
Are these people who did send in complaints, or does he have a membership? Or why doesn't he create a sub-rosa organization within the military where, where all young military people could join and be part of his army, essentially?
Yeah, I understand that. First off, those are clients that have called with concerns and complaints about violations they've perceived. So it's a huge number, and it happens. Now, a lot of those folks are terrified to be outed. Because if they're calling and complaining about their senior officer that did something to them, if that senior officer finds out that's the person that complained, they can get some serious trouble. And so a lot of people are absolutely terrified. So Mikey is that voice. Remember I started off with saying that the MRFF is that voice that we don't have? That's what they do. There has been some, we've had some folks at some of the bases that will tell people, hey, I can help you. I know who the MRFF is. And now they don't stand up at a commander's call and say, oh, I'm the MRF representative. That doesn't happen. But people talk, people know what's going on, and if somebody has a complaint, maybe I go over and say, hey, what you got going? I know somebody that can help. But unfortunately, we can't mobilize all those people because it just doesn't work in that military environment, unfortunately. And it's not career enhancing for a lot of folks. And frankly, their safety, their lives would be at risk. Thank you for your question.
Hi. Hi. So I grew up on military bases. My father was a civilian, but I spent 15 of my first 20 years on military bases. And I'm wondering, first of all, you told us how people can become officers, but how do people become military chaplains? That's one. Second thing is, do you think, has the military always been this way?
We'll answer the first question first. Chaplains are actually, with a nod toward the Constitution, go figure, right? There's an organization, and again, I'm just learning about this, but there's at least one or multiple organizations that recommend chaplains to the military. The military cannot go out and recruit directly because that violates the establishment clause of the Constitution. So go figure, they're going to go by the Constitution for this, right? So basically, these chaplains are nominated, recommended to the military, and then they're brought in and they go through training and then they become chaplains. The balance has shifted tremendously to the evangelical side. It used to not be that way. There used to be a fairly across-the-board representation of mainline Catholics, Protestants, all the different denominations. Now, obviously, we have Muslims representatives, we have Hindu. We don't have an atheist. They love to call them chaplains, but anyway, we don't have atheist representation yet, as far as I know. But that balance has shifted. About 34% of the chaplain force are evangelicals. And we're talking diehard evangelicals. Now, Hitler, the Nazi Party, he had somewhere in the neighborhood of 7.9% of his total organization were diehard followers. Stalin, about 2.9%. What do you think those, you know the history of those two individuals. How about an organization that has 34% diehard evangelicals? It's scary.
Because, I was a little boy, but I kind of got the impression back in the 60s that the Protestant services were all designed to not offend anybody because there were all these different denominations.
Correct. And in the 60s, actually, that's kind of, it actually kind of goes back, some of the research I've done, it actually goes back, the evangelical rise actually started back in World War II with the troops coming home. Because the troops came home from World War II, and how to put it delicately, if you've been at war for 4 years, you're a male, and you've been at war for 4 years, and you get home, there's certain things that are probably on your mind. And after you hug mom and dad, you probably know where you're headed. There was actually a huge rise in sexually transmitted diseases that happened with the troops coming back. And so what was the answer on the religious side? You need more Jesus. If you have more Jesus, you're not going to get an STD. So that kind of started somewhat of the rise of the evangelicals at that point, got more involved. And then the Vietnam War, a lot of the mainline Christian denominations were very much against the Vietnam War. And so they weren't offering up their representation to the military. Okay, but guess who thought the war was just? Guess who thought that what we were doing was correct? It was the evangelicals. So again, that's where the balance started to shift. And so they have basically filled in a lot of the holes. And right now, we're very woefully represented in a lot of the mainline religions. Thank you for your question. Excellent question.
Hi, thanks. When an individual in the military violates the Constitution, as you have said repeatedly happens, is there any downside for them when Mikey Weinstein
and the MRFF come in, or can they just do it again and again?
Excellent question, and thank you for asking that. Mikey Weinstein's reputation precedes him. Often the threat of a phone call from Mikey Weinstein in the MRFF is enough to change attitudes and change actions. And I will tell you, and he's known. So literally the threat to go to him to complain might change actions. Yes, Mikey's very successful in a lot of those, and just generally when they see a violation happen, and again, their organization is small. They are reacting to clients coming to them. Mikey's not riding around the base looking for trouble. Okay, he's not doing that. He's simply responding to clients. So when a client calls and tells him what's going on, Mikey's going to make a decision on, is this something we can affect? Because sometimes there are things that are questionable, or maybe it's a bridge too far to get to with the resources that he has at this moment. So when this client comes on, they offer the client AARP. They offer the client anonymity, easy for me to say, action, results, and what's the P? Protection. So that kind of comes along with the anonymity. That client is protected unless they want to come forward and have their name known. But generally, Mikey will be that voice for them. And a lot of folks, there's some folks that will step out, and there's been a lot, and quite a few atheists actually have had no problem putting their name out there. But a lot of folks are terrified and they won't do it. And again, especially, it's really gotten bad since Mr. Trump came into the Oval Office. So yes, if they take on the case, generally it might be, say that there's an incident that happened between a supervisor and a troop at base X. Mikey knows who to call. He'll pick up the phone call. He'll call direct to the leadership at that base and say, you got a problem and this is what it is. And if you don't fix it, this is what I'm going to do. And a lot of times, just enough of Mikey saying that will change action. Other times, they have to continue on to a lawsuit. They maybe work up the chain, talk to that boss's boss, and work their way up. And maybe, if it's important enough, a lawsuit will develop out of it. And but once they grab onto that, they're going to stay with it until it's either fixed or they can't proceed anymore. But you will find, if you go onto their website, go onto the MRF website and take a look, they post every time that there's a complaint about something, some of the more significant ones, but generally a lot of them, they will tell you, hey, this just happened and this is what we're doing. And then when that case is resolved or adjudicated or something happens, they're going to put a result on there too. And say, this happened at this base, we did this was the result. And a lot of times, examples of a commander standing up in front of their troops and saying, this, that, and the other, and the troops say, what he said was absolutely wrong. They pick up the phone, they call Mikey. Mikey calls that commander's boss. That boss, if the boss is leading and doing things correctly, drags that commander in and says, what you did was wrong. Go apologize to your troops. And that's happened fairly frequently, where commanders have come back and stood in front of their troops and said, what I said was wrong. I should have done it this. It was the wrong time, place, or manner. And occasionally, we get victories like that. But I'll tell you, the MRF is very potent, very, very potent, and they get a lot done. And they really do a wonderful job of taking care of our troops out there. Did that come close to answering your question? All right, thank you, sir, for your question.
Two-part question. First, has the MRF or other organizations done a study to examine this impact of the Soldiers for Christ campaign to establish a baseline to get the possibility behind some longitudinal kind of studies as they are more effective? And secondly, does MRF have a method for evaluating its own effectiveness?
The answer to the first, the answer to the first question. Again, I told you there's a lot of different organizations out there that are working towards the same end. Separation of church and state, and along those same ends that MRFF has. But again, MRFF very military specific expertise is in dealing with it in the military. As far as specific studies by outside agencies, I am not aware of one that was an overarching study done. The work that Mikey has done and the intelligence that he has gathered essentially is that study. Because the stuff that he has personally gone out to, he goes out to former classmates, he goes out to a whole range of people who provide him information. A lot of times they do it anonymously, but they provide information to him. So Mikey has a tremendous library, essentially, if you will, which to me would be that study of what is going on. The Air Force Academy did have a study. They invited in the Yale Divinity School to come out, and it was headed by a PhD, and she brought a team out, and they were actually allowed to observe the basic training at the academy. That the new cadets, when they first come in, they have a 6-week program of basic training, and the last 18 days or so are out in the woods, and they live in tents. They do physical training. They do combat type training. They just learn a lot of skills while they're out there, and it's overseen by the cadets. Generally, run the training, and a brigadier general is basically in charge of everything. The Yale Divinity School came out and watched this, and as what they saw was senior chaplains standing up with bullhorns in front of cadets, saying, if you don't evangelize to your fellow classmates who are unchurched, they're all going to hell. So you need to get involved. You need to get in their face. You need to save them from the fires of hell. Broadcasting that over a bullhorn. Every evening, and this is every evening, the cadets, in their tents, it literally was like a giant tent revival. Every tent had cadets evangelizing to the unchurched. And we're encouraged to do that by the leadership and condoned by the brigadier general that's in charge of the cadets. This is not even the superintendent's a 3-star. This general's a 1-star, and condoned by all these folks. Now, cadets were allowed to not participate in the prayer ceremonies and those sermons. They couldn't just move to the other side of the tent or get up and leave. They were physically, so okay, if you don't want to participate, get in line over here. They put them in a big line. They called them the heathen flight. And they marched him out in front of everybody. Well, the Yale Divinity School wrote that up and presented it to the academy, and first it was like, yeah, never happened. And that was during that 22-month period where the MRFF, where I was telling you how the formation was. That happened during that time period, and it was pretty powerful to actually see that. And so there's your evidence, there's your studies, and talking to the cadets, the people that call and complain, or not, and I don't want to use the word complain, because that's not right. The people that call with genuine concerns that there's violations of the Constitution, they're being discriminated against, they're being evangelized against their will. So he gets feedback, so he knows, he's very aware of what's going on out there. Both Mikey's sons and his daughter-in-law are Academy graduates, and they experienced, all three are Academy graduates, and Mikey's an Academy graduate. They've experienced that themselves. 1973, when Mikey was to share the story with you, when he was a 4th classman, just getting started in the academy, he started receiving hate mail, swastikas drawn on paper slid under his door. He was assaulted twice, physically assaulted. From behind, didn't see who did it. Second one put him in the hospital. Mikey came to the academy as an athlete, and a tennis player was recruited to play tennis, and so Mikey's an athlete, very built, very strong individual. These people put him out. When he finally, after that second incident, when he came out of that, he filed an official complaint. The investigative arm, Office of Special Investigations for the Air Force, who I equate to being the Keystone Cops, and that's my own personal take on it after working with those folks for 27 years, did an investigation. And what do you think it came down to? Oh, yeah, it never happened, and guess who did it? Mikey. They actually brought him in, an officer from the investigation brought him in and said, we know you did it. You wrote the notes to yourself. You beat yourself up. You put yourself, really? Mikey was steamed, and Mikey cold-cocked the guy and knocked him out. Fourth classman cadet just struck a superior officer, laid him out. Cold. Mikey went back to his room and waited for the cops. Cops never showed up. It was whitewashed, put under the table, swept away. Mikey vowed after that point, I am never going to let stuff get swept away again like that. Even though what he did, you know, could have got him in a whole lot of trouble. But the fact that the Air Force Academy just swept it away, and then after that had a continuous, did that pretty much with everything that happened. So, not a formal way of doing it, but there's a lot of information out there. And I'm sorry, sir, I got off tangent a little bit. What was your second question regarding Mikey? That I'd have to talk to Mikey about. I don't know if they have a formal way of doing it. I don't think Mikey has a formal after-action review of every case, but I think informally it's done, that he knows what's been successful and what hasn't. And I think that information that he uses after every case really goes into the decision-making process of, are we going to take on the next one? When the next one comes to us, what's our success rate been in the past for this type of offense? Or, you know what, we tried that 5 years ago, and we spent an awful lot of resources, expended a lot of capital on it, and we couldn't fix it. So I think that's where that information is used, where they evaluate how successful things have been in the past, what they take on in the future. And I'll tell you, if you ever talk to Mikey's got a brain that photographic memory, I mean, he can tell you stuff that happened, just the minutia of every single event. And so that he does those after-action reviews right in his head. And then he directs the organization with that in mind, which is absolutely the right way to do it.
Okay, I think we have time for one more, so it's going to be Kenita here.
Sweet.
Okay, I guess it might be a two-part thing.
Sure.
One, when you say things that you tried 5 years ago, the difference between now and 5 years ago is that we have a madman in office now. And I'm wondering if Trump has any specific connections to the evangelicals who are messing around with the, you know, military and the chaplaincy and all that, and whether any of, you know, if there's particular blowback where being against Trump makes you an anti-patriot and thus a communist or something like that.
Excellent question. Thank you so much for asking that. There's a wonderful article out, and Mikey, I've seen it attributed to a different author, but he corrected me on who the author is, but I want to tell you the name. It's called The Trump Effect, and it was published in Newsweek. Just type in Newsweek and go Trump Effect, and it will get you the article. And the article has a photograph of a Marine, and it's basically the top of his, on the cover of his Kevlar of his helmet, has a psalm written on it. And this is from a picture taken in the Middle East. And that article is about the Trump effect. So just type that in. Please take a look at it. I've seen two versions of it, but look at the one that is written by a young lady that works for Newsweek. So just type in Newsweek Trump effect. You'll see it. What that's done, what was Trump's base, one of his base of people that got him elected? He pretended to be a Christian. If Donald Trump is a Christian, I'm freaking Mother Teresa. Okay? He's an absolute con artist. He's a fake. He's a phony. He pretended to be a Christian, and the evangelicals loved it because now we can put God back in the White House. We can further our agenda. They didn't do it because they liked Trump. They did it to further their agenda. So those folks voted to put him in office. And so he pandered to that base, and since then, there's been a rise in religious bigotry, discrimination, and if you spend any time on Facebook and you see it across the board, it's unbelievable. People feel empowered now, and I'm not just saying, I'm not going by stuff that people have like written. I've seen things posted, videos in Walmart of a white woman screaming at a person of color saying, "Go back to your own effing country." These people feel, because of Donald Trump, because he's empowered people to, hey, it's okay to get out and to be a jerk, and which is rather funny with this woman yelling at this person of color who happened to be a Native American. Go back to your own country. Yeah, that shows the level of smartness these people have. But if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, literally, and it's happened, it always seems to be white people on people of color. Number one target is normally Muslims. They see somebody with something on their head, they start screaming at them, go back to your own country. Trump has made this okay in their minds. He is absolutely responsible for it. As I told you before, the number of complaints, they've tracked this, and sir, again, they keep track of all this. They track the numbers have literally exactly doubled since Trump took office, the number of complaints. But as what has been tough is the people that are reporting, and again, I keep saying complaints, but it's not the right word, the concerns that they have witnessed, because I don't want these people to come off as being whiners, because they're not. They have absolutely legitimate cases here. But they are terrified because of the fact that Trump has emboldened people to be more vicious, to be more discriminatory, to be more racist, to be more bigoted. He's made that happen. He's told people they can do that. And his base, that's exactly his base, and they love it. They get fired up, and they go out and do it. These people that that bring these concerns forward, they're terrified of for their lives, because now they're even in greater danger, because there's nutcases running around going, the president said I could do it. And so it makes it sometimes a little bit more difficult, because the MRF will never, with a client, they will never say, hey, if you out yourself, if you put your name forward and bring this out, it'll help the cause. They will never, ever do that. Never. By the way, they never charge a dime for their service either, by the way. But they will never put that person in danger. That client's anonymity and protection are paramount. And the way they treat their clients ensures that people will continue to be confident in being able to come forward, that their voices will be heard, and they will be safe for the most part. But it's been very difficult. Again, I told you, Mikey is not getting rich doing this. His family started out fairly wealthy. They're not anymore. He's put his heart and soul, he and Bonnie and his family have put their heart and soul and their finances into this. A lot of times he single-handedly runs this organization out of his own checkbook. Okay, the organization depends on donors, grants, matching funds, fellow patriots out there like this room, providing donations to them. One of the ways those donations come in is a thing called the Combined Federal Campaign, and that happens once a year, and it's a big push. And in the military, every year, I got the booklet, a very thick booklet, and it basically had every charity out there or nonprofit that you could donate to. It listed who they were. It listed how much that, one of the things I always look for is how much are their overhead expenses. That was a big thing. I wasn't going to give money to somebody that spends 60% of what they get, on, like Wounded Warriors did for a period of time, through parties for themselves. Okay, that got fixed. But anyway, I would look at that. Well, MRFF is one of those organizations that's in that book. But you know how this is done? They ask for volunteers in the unit. Hey, who wants to be the CFC officer? So what the CFC officer does, walks around everybody's desk. Hey, are you interested? Not forcing them to, are you interested? Yeah, sure. And then we'll hand you the book, and they'll hand you the slip. And on that slip, you write down the information on it, who the organization is, what the numbers is, what your donation would be. Is it a one-time? Is it a monthly? Is it an annual? Whatever. You fill that out. Well, guess who sees that? That person walking around that's collecting all of them. Okay? So what if I'm going to give this much to the MRF per week or per month. Okay, here's this officer going, who is this person? That person tells somebody, that person tells somebody. Now this person has been outed, if you will. It should be a perfectly legitimate. What could be better than donating money to an organization whose sole purpose is to support and defend the Constitution and to make sure everybody has equal representation in it and the equal religious freedom, the freedom to worship as they please, or the freedom not to? But hey, let's do it in the right right time, place, or manner, and let's not kill each other over it. So, I mean, this is a patriotic organization. Mikey is a patriot, his family. At my retirement ceremony, I actually said Mikey's family is the bravest family I've ever met, because when I learned about what they go through. And can you imagine, folks, every day, the level of hate mail where books are getting written about it, and there's actually a second book probably going to come out, and that's just the good stuff. That's not the stuff that comes out every day. Could you handle that? Phone calls in the middle of the night, your windows getting shot out of your house, all because you're a patriot wanting to make sure that the Constitution that is abided by. I mean, really. But anyway, long story short, the MRFF used to do pretty well in the CFC. Those donations have dropped considerably since Mr. Trump took office, because people are afraid to put that down, to be associated with that. And so that's tough. That's hard. That's very hard on the organization. But anyway, Mr. Trump is a full-fledged threat to our national security. That's my personal opinion, Greg Petrequin's personal opinion. And but the Trump effect is absolutely real, and it's had a significant effect on the MRFF based on the clients doubling and the money lessened. Are there any more questions? We're just about on time. I'd like to just, if I could, Judy, take 30 seconds, and I'd like to just to read you a quote from Bonnie Weinstein and a quote from Mikey, just to wrap things up, if I may. This is Bonnie Weinstein, his wife, talking. I'm so proud of all that Mikey and I have accomplished, but it's been at the extreme cost of a normal life and a secure future. That's a trade-off no one should have to make. There's a very real toll that comes with this work. The Danish philosopher Kierkegaard once said, "We live our lives forwards, but we only understand it backwards. In my best moments, I know in my heart and with every fiber of my being that defending the Constitution is the right thing to do." She pauses, leaving a silence that is as expressive as a primal scream. "It doesn't cost a lot," she continues. "It costs everything." Mikey, this is Mikey Weinstein. The well-being of the entire planet hinges on the integrity and the honorable intentions of the United States military. It goes without saying that we have created the most powerful and lethal armed force in the history of humankind. That reality demands a concurrent adherence to the vital constitutional principles that guide our secular democracy. We cannot allow that power to fall into the hands of Christian fundamentalist dominionists who believe that the Bible instructs them to eradicate all non-believers as a prerequisite for the second coming of Christ and the establishment of his millennial rule and reign. In the nuclear age, this is purely and self-evidently a matter of the survival for the entire species. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I really enjoyed talking to you tonight.
We would all like to thank